He said one sentence to DP World Tour, and the entire golf world went silent. What if I told you that one of the greatest golfers alive accused his own former tour of extortion, and then, months later, did something nobody saw coming? Stick around, because by the end of this video you'll understand exactly why Jon Rahm's war with the DP World Tour is the biggest power struggle in golf right now, and how it could change the Ryder Cup forever. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now. Not for me, but for yourself. Because every single week we break down the stories the big sports channels won't tell you the full truth about, the politics, the money, the betrayal behind the scenes of professional golf. If you care about the real story behind the headlines, you need to be part of this channel. Hit subscribe, tap the bell, and let's get into it. Let's rewind to where this whole thing exploded. It was February. The DP World Tour had just struck a deal with 8 LIV golf players. Names like Tyrrell Hatton, Laurie Cantor, Thomas Detry, Tom McKibben, Adrian Meronk, Victor Perez, David Puig and Elvis Smiley. These 8 men agreed to pay their outstanding fines, commit to playing a set number of DP World Tour events every year, and promote those events in the media. In return, the tour promised no further punishment for playing conflicting LIV events. On paper, that sounds like a fair compromise. Pay what you owe, show some loyalty to the tour that built your career, and you get to keep playing wherever you want. 8 players signed. But one man refused. Jon Rahm. A 2-time major champion. An 11-time PGA Tour winner. A 10-time winner on the DP World Tour. One of the most talented golfers of his generation. And he said no? Now here's where it gets personal. Just 2 weeks after that deal was announced, Rahm sat down in front of reporters at the LIV Golf Hong Kong event, and what came out of his mouth shocked the entire golf community. He accused the DP World Tour of extorting its own players. Let that sink in for a second. A man who has represented Europe at 4 Ryder Cups, who has worn that jersey with pride, who built his name partly through the European Tour system, stood in front of cameras and called his own former organization extortionists. Rahm explained his reasoning in detail. He said he didn't like being dictated to about where he could and couldn't play. He believed players should have the freedom to choose their own schedules. But what really set him off was one specific demand. The DP World Tour required players accepting the conditional release to commit to playing 6 tour events a year, not 4, which was the standard minimum membership requirement. Rahm pointed out that if they simply lowered that number back down to 4, the actual rule that's always existed, he would sign immediately. He said it himself, almost daring them to call his bluff. Lower it to 4, and I'll sign tonight. They didn't budge. And so neither did he. Now, why does this number matter so much? Why would Jon Rahm risk his entire Ryder Cup future over 2 extra tournaments a year? Because to Rahm, this wasn't about scheduling. It was about control. He felt like the DP World Tour was trying to use him, and players like him, as a profit engine. Find them when they leave for LIV, then squeeze them for media appearances and tournament participation to boost ratings and sponsorship value, all while still treating them like outsiders. In his words, the tour was trying to benefit both ways, finding players for leaving while also leaning on their star power to fill out fields and draw eyeballs. This is the part most fans don't fully understand. Jon Rahm signed with LIV Golf back in late 2023, in a deal reportedly worth around $300 million. That's not a typo. $300 million. It was one of the biggest contracts in the history of professional sports, let alone golf. And from the moment he signed it, his relationship with traditional golf bodies became complicated. The PGA Tour and the DP World Tour both have strict policies. If you play in a conflicting event without getting an official release, you get fined. Multiple players who left for LIV faced this exact punishment. But because of his contract size and his refusal to simply accept the terms quietly, Rahm became the face of this entire conflict. By March, the fines had piled up. Reports suggested they had crossed the $3 million mark. Rahm had initially appealed those fines back in 2024, hoping for a resolution. But as the months dragged on and frustration built, he withdrew that appeal entirely. Withdrawing the appeal meant something serious. It meant he was no longer fighting the fines through official channels. It meant, unless something changed, he would remain ineligible to play DP World Tour events, including, most critically, the Ryder Cup. For a player like Rahm, who has won 3 of his 4 Ryder Cup appearances with Team Europe, who collected 3 points in 5 matches at Bethpage just the year before, the idea of being locked out of that competition wasn't just a financial inconvenience. It was personal. It struck at the heart of his golfing identity. And here's where the story takes a turn that nobody expected. While Rahm was digging in his heels publicly, calling out the tour, refusing to sign, accusing them of extortion in front of the entire world's media, something else was happening behind the scenes. The ground underneath LIV Golf itself was beginning to shift. Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, the very organization that bankrolled LIV Golf's existence, announced it would be cutting its funding to the league after the conclusion of the 2026 season. The statement was almost clinical in its phrasing, saying that the level of investment required was no longer aligned with the fund's strategy going forward. Around the same time, Yasser Al-Rumayyan, the man who had been the face of LIV Golf's leadership as chairman of its board, stepped down from that position. Think about the timing here. Jon Rahm is standing at LIV Golf Virginia, in the middle of his standoff with the DP World Tour, while the very league he signed his $300 million contract with is suddenly facing an uncertain financial future. The foundation he had built his rebellion on was starting to crack. This is the moment everything changed. Faced with mounting fines, an uncertain LIV future, and the very real possibility of missing the Ryder Cup he clearly still cared about, Jon Rahm did something nobody expected after months of defiant, fiery public statements that he made a deal. In May, the DP World Tour announced that an agreement had been reached. Rahm would pay all of his outstanding fines accrued since 2024. He would also commit to participating in DP World Tour tournaments, outside of the majors, for the remainder of the 2026 season. But here's the twist that made golf fans sit up and pay attention. His conditions weren't identical to the other 8 players who had signed back in February. Because Rahm had already been sanctioned for playing 3 conflicting tournaments during the standoff, his minimum participation requirement was actually reduced. Instead of the standard 6 events, it was prorated down to 5. In other words, Jon Rahm held his ground long enough, made enough noise, caused enough disruption, that when the deal finally came together, he didn't get exactly what the other 8 signed up for. He got better terms. When asked about it, Rahm described the resolution in a measured tone, very different from his fiery comments back in March. He said there had been concessions on both sides. He offered something, they extended a gesture of goodwill in return, and they reached an agreement. He said it wouldn't be a source of stress anymore. But don't mistake that calm tone for surrender. In the same breath, Rahm made it clear he still wants to keep playing LIV golf. He talked about how much fun it's been, how he wants to keep competing alongside his teammates there. He even acknowledged that the road ahead for LIV's leadership, now scrambling without its primary financial backer, was going to require a lot of hard work. So what does this mean going forward? With the agreement in place, Rahm becomes eligible to earn race to Dubai points starting at the next PGA Championship and beyond. That's significant, because earlier in the year, he had actually been ineligible to earn ranking points at the Masters, despite playing, simply because he was still in breach of tour regulations over those unpaid fines. And most importantly, for European golf fans everywhere, this clears the path for Jon Rahm to be eligible for the Ryder Cup. DP World Tour members need to play a minimum number of events to maintain membership, and membership is required for Ryder Cup eligibility. With this deal, that pressure is gone. Team Europe captain Luke Donald had publicly hoped earlier in the year that a resolution could be found, and now, it has been. There's even a deeply human detail buried in all of this. Rahm mentioned that his only real concern about fulfilling his DP World Tour commitments later in the year was the due date for the birth of his daughter. That, he said, was the one thing that might keep him away from an event like the Spanish Open. Beyond that, he said, the tour could count on his participation. It's a strange contrast when you think about it. Here's a man who stood in front of cameras accusing his own tour of extortion, who withdrew his appeal and dug in for months, who became the symbolic center of the entire LIV versus traditional golf battle. And in the end, the thing he worried about most wasn't the politics, the money, or the fines. It was being there for the birth of his child. So what's the real lesson behind this entire saga? This wasn't really about 6 tournaments versus 4. It wasn't really about $3 million in fines either, not for a man with a $300 million contract. This was about power. It was about whether players who left for LIV Golf would be treated as outsiders forever, or whether there was a path back to coexistence with the tours that built their careers. Jon Rahm's public confrontation forced the DP World Tour to negotiate in a way the other 8 players never did. He didn't just accept the terms on the table. He called the tour out publicly, accused them of using their power unfairly, and walked away from the table when the deal didn't suit him. And in the end, that approach got him better terms than the players who signed quietly back in February. Whether you see that as smart strategic leverage or as a star player using his fame to bend the rules in his favor, one thing is certain. Jon Rahm changed the conversation around how LIV golf players negotiate their way back into traditional tour structures. And with LIV's financial backing now in serious question following the Saudi PIF's decision to step back, this entire landscape is likely to keep shifting in the months ahead. The big question now is this. With LIV Golf's funding uncertain and more players potentially looking for a way back to traditional tours, will Jon Rahm's approach become the blueprint other LIV players follow? Will we see more public standoffs, more accusations, more high-stakes negotiations playing out in front of cameras before deals get done? Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think Jon Rahm was right to call out the DP World Tour, or do you think he simply used his star power to get a better deal than everyone else? And do you think we'll see him at the Ryder Cup representing Europe again? If you made it this far, you clearly care about real golf stories, not just the surface-level highlights. So do me a favor. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, drop a like on this video, and let me know in the comments what story you want us to dig into next. We'll see you in the next one.